Hello guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session is on PHD2 guiding by Andy Galasso, one of the developers. But before we get into that, I want to show off our weekly image spotlight by Paul Stewart. Paul was not able to come into the room tonight, but I can show you his image. Paul's a solar imager, and this is his solar image using a calcium K telescope. Paul gave me a little blurb to read, so I'll just go right ahead and read it. This image was taken using a William Optics Z80 refractor with a Lunt B1800 Cal-K module and a Point Grey Grasshopper 3 camera. The best 30% of 500 frames were stacked with AutoStacker in Photoshop, LR Decon with the Astro Imaging plugin, shadow highlights to add some contrast and bring out the prominences, rotated to the correct orientation and cropped. That's about it. You don't need a lot for solar. So I just want to thank Paul for sharing his image with us, and it's a great image. And I'm going to use this image to send out a request. If anyone out there knows of any solar processors, any really proficient solar processors, I'd love to have someone come on and do some stuff, do a session. But otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right over and let Andy take over. We click out of there, and there we go.
All right. Thanks, Adam.
No problem.
And thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to switch over to my slides right now. Hopefully that'll work. Let's see. That look okay?
Right now, I'm only seeing your avatar, but let me ask some of the other people. Are you guys just seeing his avatar? Or do you see a slide?
I see the slide.
Okay, this happened to me last week, too. I guess you're good to go then. There we go. Now I see the slide. Same thing happened last week. Thank you, Andy.
Okay, great. Here we go. So, yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited about talking about PHD2. Some guiding is something I'm really passionate about. It's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, both the guiding aspect and the experience as an amateur astronomer, astrophotographer, getting guiding to work well and easily, and hopefully be just something you don't have to think about and something that just works. So I'm a developer in the PHD2 project. I'm going to talk a little bit at the beginning of the talk about our project, some of the history of it, and then I'll go on and talk about some tips and techniques for getting the most out of PHD2 guiding, and hopefully you'll come out of it at the end of this with some ideas for improving your guiding, and also knowing a little bit more about this project. So let me just get going. So probably most of you guys are familiar with the original PhD guiding program by Craig Stark. This was really the de facto choice for astro imagers who are starting out. It's a free program and it had an excellent reputation. It's very easy to use, supports lots of cameras, lots of mounts, and that was the program that I started using when I started imaging a few years back. It turned out that Craig actually released the source code to PHD back in 2009, and that was the genesis of the Open PHD guiding project. Craig continued to maintain PHD and do releases of that program on his own through Stark Labs, but the source code was now available for people to work on. So after 2009, there really wasn't a lot of activity. The source code was available, but developers didn't exactly go flocking to it. There was very little activity over those early years. Then in 2013, something happened. There was a huge bump in activity in Open PHD guiding. And I'm going to tell you what happened in 2013. Basically, Brett McKee happened. Brett dove in and did a large reworking of the guts of PHD. He created a new multi-threaded architecture. He added support for AO devices, and he sort of reorganized the code base. And this created a nice, strong, well-organized base for future developers coming into the project. In the early years, I should mention, there was a bunch of those early commits that we saw were from a bunch of guys doing Linux work, basically, getting PHD to run on Linux. And that work was the basis for PHD running on Linux today. Around 2013, we also had a bunch of other guys jumped in and did various improvements along with Brett. Guys like Sylvain, Jared Wellman, you know, from Sequence Generator, Sequence Generator Pro. John Wainwright redid the guide logging infrastructure, and Hans picked up the Linux maintenance side of the application. Also in 2013, myself and my friend Bruce Waddington happened to join the project. And by summer of 2013, we had our first release, and we sort of dubbed it PHD2, sort of to make it a shorter name than Open PHD Guiding. Currently, Bruce and I are continuing to be active in development. Hans is also active on the Linux side, and we've got some other stuff going on. I'll mention that later on. I'm a little hesitant to put up this kind of slide because I'm always afraid that I'm going to miss somebody, so I apologize if I missed some contributors here. So where we are today, we've come a long way from that first release. We're up to our 2.5.0 release, which I just actually put out yesterday. We've got you know, a huge amount of changes over the original PHD program in stability, lots of new features, performance, but we've always tried to keep Craig's original vision of making it the simplest possible guiding program. It really should just be as simple as pushing a button to get going. We hope that we've made PHD2 even easier for new users. We've actually spent a lot of effort on that, both in terms of guiding new users through getting set up and providing feedback when things are looking like they're not going well. PHD will actually recognize that and give suggestions on how to fix it. At the same time, we've added lots of sophisticated stuff for more advanced users, though hopefully most people shouldn't need to use that. We've had a terrific response from astrophotographers around the world. We have people showing up all the time offering to translate PHD into their native language. Right now, we'll run in at least 10 different languages. That's kind of cool. That's been fun seeing that happen. We have a very active community. We have a website, and we still continue to support the program through the Stark Labs forum. But we also have a dedicated forum in Google Groups, and that tends to be more geared towards development and feature requests. And we're tapping into all of the guiding experience in the Stark Labs PHD1 forum to continue to support PHD2. Now, so PHD1 was free, and PHD2 is also free, but it's more than just free. It's open source, and if you're not familiar with what open source is, that means that the code is available, and it's under a license. It will always be available. It'll always be free, and we're not dependent on any one person or any one company. PhD will continue to improve, and we're trying to establish a community where we want that to flourish. So we try to have no barriers to entry. If somebody comes along with a good idea, like David Alt did a little while ago with his idea for bad pixel maps, defect maps, we did everything we could to get that incorporated in. We try to be very transparent about all our open issues. We have all our bug reports and feature requests in a sort of database that's available on the web. Anybody can go and look at that. There's some downsides about this being sort of a loose collaborative effort. If there's a new camera that comes along and none of the developers have that camera, then it's going to be a while, if ever, that that camera will get incorporated support into PHD2. So we have to rely on vendors to either donate us equipment, and there have been some vendors who have been very good about that, or users to come along and loan us their equipment or work very closely with us to work through debugging, getting new equipment going. So I was originally going to go down and list all the features in PHD2, but that's just going to be crazy, and I'm going to skip all that. You can read our help file, and there's lots of resources online, or ask us questions on the forum. So I'm going to just jump right into, let's talk about guiding. Oh, I should mention, when I was talking to Adam earlier about the focus of this presentation, he mentioned that most people here are intermediate to advanced imagers. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the basics of what guiding is and how to get set up. I'm going to sort of assume that you're already guiding now, and you're looking to improve your guiding. So I'm not going to talk about how to connect cameras and mounts and all that stuff. So, of course, the idea with guiding is we want to have be tracking our photography target smoothly as it travels across the sky. And to do that, we're going to lock onto a guide star, but that guide star is going to be subject to a bunch of different sources of contributions that are cause that star to kind of wiggle around. That's going to be your RA drive. It's not going to be perfectly smooth. There's going to be some error in there, usually periodic error. Your polar alignment is going to cause your guide star to slowly drift in declination. The differential atmospheric refraction as the star moves across the sky is going to affect the rate. There's going to be possibly some mechanical flexure in your imaging gear or your optics. And the good news is that all of these things are slow, steady effects. So far, the first four that I've mentioned, and those are things that we can correct with guiding, which is what makes it so valuable. Unfortunately, we are imaging through our atmosphere, and that introduces this random motion of the star, the effect of atmospheric seeing, and that's a random effect, and that's something that we generally cannot correct for at all, and that's really what throws the wrench and makes guiding an interesting and difficult problem. Now, it is possible, I have an asterisk, you can correct some of the low frequency components of atmospheric seeing, with AO devices. I'll talk about that a little bit as we go along, but in general, there's nothing you can do about seeing, so you just have to deal with it. So,
Andy, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. We did get one question, and I'm going to remind everyone out there on the YouTube side, type your questions into Q&A, but Marcin Eggert is asking, you mentioned a PhD-related Stark Labs discussion forum.
yes.
The PHD2 team contributes to.
Yes.
How did he find this forum? And I know there were a couple forums that you mentioned. Would you just repeat them, or even pull up that slide again?
Sure. Yeah, those are the two links at the bottom. I'll share these slides afterwards. But if you go to openphdguiding.org, both of these links are there right on that front page. So really, the only link you need to remember here is openphdguiding.org.
Thank you.
All right, back to okay. So here's one tip that I want to put out, which might be the biggest takeaway tip that I can give for this talk, and that is simply to, before you try to guide, take a look and observe how your guide star is moving with guiding turned off. We actually, in the latest release of PHD2, have introduced a new tool we call the Guiding Assistant, and basically all that is it is turning off guiding and tracking the star and looking at the motion to give you an idea of what the magnitude of the seeing is, what the magnitude of your periodic error is, to give you an idea of what's the best you're going to do for guiding. If you can see on this graph below that's a picture of my mount in my backyard with guiding turned off. The blue line is right ascension, the red line is declination. I'm pretty well polar aligned, so there's very little drift in declination, but all of those oscillations are due to the poor seeing that I have here around here, and most of us have, I think. So this is giving you an idea of just how random that star motion is, and there's nothing that you can do to really correct for that. So if you're trying to tweak your settings to get below this level of uncertainty, you're not gonna it's not gonna be effective. So the first tip is just take a look without guiding, get an idea of what the seeing looks like, and then you'll know first of all what's the best your guiding is going to do that night, and second of all you'll have a better sense of how aggressive you can set your guiding parameters. So I mentioned this guiding assistant. That's the window in the top right. We're tracking the star motion and looking at its motion on each of the axes, right ascension and declination. And Adam, is there a way I can get a pointer or something like that? Or do you see my mouse at all?
Yes, I do see your mouse.
Okay. Yeah, so this area here is showing the motion of the star, and it's actually, we're putting that through a high-pass filter, so it's not measuring your the drift or the slow periodic error. So that's giving you a sense of how the seeing is. We are also looking at the slower drift. This number here, right ascension peak to peak, is a measure basically of your RA periodic error, the amplitude of it. The drift rate is showing how close your polar alignment is. Actually, this is an older screenshot. The newer one actually will give a number in arc minutes of your actual polar alignment error. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about declination drift rate, of course. The right ascension drift, we're interested. That's an interesting number because the rate that your RA or your RA error, the maximum steepness of your curve is going to determine your maximum exposure duration. For example, if your RA error is very slowly varying and smooth, you don't need to send rapid guide corrections, so that allows you to have longer guide exposures. If your error is like mine here, you can see there's certain steep sections of the curve, and that means that we have to have more rapid guide exposures to keep up with the rapidly changing RA motion. And this tool will give you an estimate for a maximum exposure duration. So taking a step back a little, here's the big picture for how any guiding program is going to work. Starting at the top, we're gonna use your guide camera to capture an image. From there, we're going to locate the centroid of your guide star. The centroid is the sort of the weighted average of the intensity of the pixels that are comprising that star. We're going to compare that location of that centroid to your lock position, and from that we'll determine what corrections we're going to need to bring the centroid back to the lock position on each of the axes, RA and DEC. Then we'll send those guide pulses to your mount and repeat. Now, each of these steps, there are some factors that are going to be under your control as a user. And I'm going to talk about the things that you can do to improve the situation at each of these steps.
Before we go on to that,
Sure.
Would you mind telling us, I'm pretty familiar with PHD2. I'm not necessarily on the latest release, but how long has this guiding assistant been around?
It's new in the 2.5 release. We introduced it, so we have a sort of a slow release cycle for our major releases. We don't do those more than every several months. Our minor releases, we publish those, I don't know, sometimes weekly. So it's been, it's in this latest 2.5.0 release. It's probably been around for maybe a month and a half.
Then the real question that Tom G has turned in is, so where do I go to find that guiding assistant?
Oh, sure, easy. I'll show you. I have PHD running right now. I'll just pop it right up. Okay, so tools, guiding assistant.
Okay.
So I may as well. I'll run through it right now. While it's so basically you just start it. It has turned off guiding. You wait for a while, and it's updating these statistics in real time. Once you want to wait for at least a minute or so, maybe longer if you're trying to get an accurate estimate of the magnitude of your periodic error. But when you decide it's stable enough, you hit stop, and PHD will give you some recommendations for your guide settings.
Okay.
which you can apply automatically if you like.
Okay, thank you. And I should tell you that the people listening on YouTube, you're on about a half a minute at least delay from the people that are in the group. So sometimes it'll take us a while to get to some of the questions, Andy.
Okay.
So sometimes there'll be a gap between the time you finish talking about something before the people on YouTube will even see what you're saying.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. All right, I'll go back to the presentation now. Yeah, so at each of these steps in the process, there are things that you can do to help PhD. We try to make it as automatic as possible, but it's not always possible, and that's some of the things I'll talk about next. First of all, when you are setting up your equipment in PHD2, you really want to take advantage of equipment profiles, and that's a new feature in PHD2 where we will allow you to. Later, I should probably demo this as I'm talking. Basically, you can have multiple configurations of equipment, and PHD2 will maintain all your settings for each of those configurations. You can create a new equipment profile. The best way is to use this wizard feature. This is also what you'll see when you first install PHD2. This wizard will pop right up and ask you to put your equipment in. I'll go through and create a new profile right now. I happen to have a Starshoot Auto Guider connected right now. So you can have PHD2 detect your pixel size. Hopefully that will work. Yep, there it goes. You can put in your focal length, specify what type of mount you have. If you have an AO, you can give the name. I'll call this SSAG scope, for example. It'll prompt you to build a dark library. I'm going to skip that step right now for this demonstration. And now what this has done is it's created a new equipment profile, and it's also initialized all the settings that PHD will use to reasonable defaults for that equipment. Those are things like your calibration step size, your pixel scale, and some of the parameter, the default guide algorithms and the parameters for those algorithms. So I'm going to switch back to this one. So anyway, that's something you should definitely take advantage of. When you're switching, if you have multiple setups, for example, you might have a setup. I use an off-axis guider. Sometimes I use a focal reducer, sometimes not. So I have different profiles for whether or not I'm using that focal reducer, and you can just switch back and forth. And PHD keeps all your settings. Another thing you want to do is make sure, if you're on Windows, that you're using an ASCOM connection to your mount. PHD2 can use that connection to find out where your scope is pointing, both in terms of the coordinates, RA and DEC, but also the side of peer. So once PHD2 knows that, it can automatically compensate your guiding for your declination, and also for before and after you do a peer flip. It can just seamlessly recognize that, and you don't have to recalibrate or anything like that. We realized that some people still need to use an ST4 connection to their mount. Usually that's because it's an older mount that doesn't have a very good ASCOM pulse guide capability. And we've covered that by allowing this thing we call the auxiliary mount or aux mount. Let me show you where that is in PHD2. That's this thing down here. So if you're using an ST4 connection for guiding, you can still get that pointing information from your mount. So you can have the best of both worlds. But in general, if you can use ASCOM pulse guiding, that's definitely the way to go. It's simpler. Some things to make sure: you want to make sure you have input the right focal length and pixel size. That's going to allow PHD2 to display things in terms of arc seconds, which is much more meaningful than just straight pixels. And I'm just rattling off some random tips here. Please do not disable your debug log or guide log. At some time you're going to want to go back to diagnose something, and you're going to wish that you had that guide log. These are both turned on by default. The application gives you the ability to turn them off. I'm not really sure why we have that there. We might remove it sometime, but please just keep them on. I'll keep going with some tips here. You're definitely going to want to use a dark library or a bad pixel map to take care of hot pixels from your camera. Under some circumstances, PHD2 can lock onto a hot pixel as if it were a guide star, and that's just a bad thing to happen. And the primary way to eliminate that possibility is to use a bad pixel, dark library or bad pix map. Dark libraries have been around since PHD1, and we improved them a little bit in PHD2, making them a little easier to create. They tend to work really well, but they can be temperature dependent. Most of our guide cameras are not temperature regulated, so as the seasons go by, we go from winter into summer. If you created your dark library in the winter, you'll start to see more bad pixels showing up in the summertime as the temperature warms up. So it's easy enough just to create a new dark library every few months or so as the temperature changes. New feature we have in PHD2 is a bad pixel map, and that doesn't have this temperature dependency. Basically, you specify the locations of the hot pixels, and those just get subtracted individually rather than the global subtraction that can add a little bit of noise if you're using a dark library. I don't know if I could demonstrate how easy it is to create a bad pixel map. I'll hold off on that. If people want to do that afterwards, we can go back and do that. But it's very easy to create a bad pixel map. I mentioned specifying the locations. I didn't want to make that sound like you have to pick the locations. PHD will find those bad pixels and create the map for you. You have the ability to manually add hot pixels later on if you want to. If sometimes new hot pixels will show up, and you can just simply click on them to add them to the bad pixel map. So I think it's really easy to use. Let's see. So now that you have all your equipment set up, you want to make sure your rest of your gear is ready to guide. You should be polar aligned, reasonably well balanced. Make sure everything is tightly coupled. Make sure you don't have cables dragging. Um, in terms of polar alignment, we have a tool in PHD2, a drift align tool. There's a tutorial we put together. I have the link here. You can also find this link on the openphdguiding.org homepage. This is something that we could go through afterwards if we have more time and people are interested. Sometimes people ask how good your polar alignment needs to be, and the answer really depends on how much field rotation you're willing to tolerate. You could have a very bad polar alignment and still have very good guiding, but the end result on your image is it's going to be field rotation, and that depends on a number of factors like where in the sky you're pointing. And there's some neat calculators out there. Here's a link to my favorite one. Okay, so now you're all set up and polar aligned and ready to start guiding. You're going to need to calibrate. Now, I mentioned one of the advantages of having an ASCOM connection is that PHD is going to be able to adjust its guiding depending where you're pointing in the sky. These days with PHD2, assuming you do have an ASCOM connection, all you really need to do is calibrate once. Preferably you do that down near the celestial equator where the RA and DEC rates are, calibration rates are uniform. You can run that calibration once, one night, and then as long as you don't disturb your equipment, like rotate your guide camera or anything like that, then you shouldn't need to calibrate anymore. You can go for months without recalibrating. We have a new tool in PHD2 to review your calibration. I think I have a screenshot of that coming up next, so I'll talk about that when we get to it. Calibration step size is something that's always been a little tricky for new users, but we think we've made that pretty much automated now with the new profile wizard, and we also have a calculator that you can get to where PHD2 will choose your calibration step size for you. I can demonstrate that too later if that's something people are interested in. Yeah, so here's what the calibration review looks like. It's definitely a really good idea to spend some time and make sure you have a very good calibration, especially since now this is something you're going to be reusing over and over again automatically. You may as well validate that you have a good calibration. A good calibration means you're going to have your east-west and north-south axes are going to be orthogonal at 90 degrees. The calibration review will tell you how far away from 90 degrees you are. So that here in this case, only off by a degree or so. So it's good. And your RA and DEC rates. So this is done right at declination 0. So the rates should be 15 arcs, the sidereal rate, 15 arc seconds per second, and you can see they're pretty close to that. So this is a good calibration. So I wanted to show an example of a calibration that wasn't so good. There's a bunch of problems going on here. So the convention we have is blue is RA and red is declination. So we can see during the westward moves, there's some motion in the north-south direction. That's probably just seeing. I think this configuration was a relatively long focal length. But then when we go after the westward calibration, calibrating back east, there's this drift towards the north. So that indicates to me that there's probably a pretty bad polar alignment in this system. So that's the first problem that we see. Second problem, now when we're doing the northward calibration, we see a bunch of east-west motion, so that says there's probably some pretty big RA drive error going on. That's another problem. Then the third problem is after the north calibration completes and PHD tries to move the star back southward to the starting position, star doesn't move at all. So that shows that we have a lot of declination backlash going on. So a good calibration, you're going to see basically moves out and back at 90 degrees on each axis and nothing else. If you see other stuff going on, it means you want to pay attention and take care of it. Otherwise, you're going to be struggling with guiding. It's not something that you can fix with software. You've got hardware issues going on.
Andy?
Yeah.
I've seen the error message, right ascension calibration failed, star did not move enough.
Yeah.
Would you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a very common issue. It tends to be largely, well, okay, there's a number of things that can cause it. For example, first one to rule out would be locking onto a hot pixel and not a star. Obviously, the hot pixel is not going to move, so that'll cause that error. Assuming you are really locked onto a star, that's generally caused by excessive declination backlash. So PHD is sending these fixed length guide commands, move north, move north, move north, and the star is just not moving. And usually it means that you have this backlash or slop in your gears, or even stiction, so that the that declination axis is not actually moving in response to those guide commands. One thing that you can actually get decent guiding with a large amount of declination backlash, as long as you're making corrections in one direction only, so you don't have to have those gears move and take up that slack in the opposite direction. So there's a little trick to getting a good calibration when you do have backlash, and that's to make sure before you do start your calibration, use your mount's hand paddle to move north for a short time before you start, and that will take out that the backlash. And you know that PHD2 is always going to start its calibration in the north direction, so at the time that it does start, it won't be seeing any backlash, and then you'll get you should get a decent calibration. You might have this same problem when it turns around and tries to move south, but those restoring moves, the southward moves, have nothing to do with the calibration. The calibration is already done by the time it finishes the northward moves. The southward moves are just basically to get you back where you started.
Andy, when in between moving one way and then moving back the other way, it sits there and goes removing backlash.
Yeah.
What's it doing?
Yeah. So as it starts to move north, we're looking at the position of the guide star, and we want it to move. We want to see it move at least a certain amount, so that we know that it's the guide pulses that are actually causing the star to move, as opposed to just seeing fluctuations. So it's just observing the star position and waiting to see it move north. Once it sees it start to move, we record that position and do the actual calibration. So this backlash is very common. If you don't do this trick that I just mentioned of using your mount controller and pressing north for a couple seconds before you start calibration, then PHD has no way of knowing where you are within that slop region of backlash. So PHD assumes that it has to move at least some amount until it sees the star start moving to know that that backlash has been taken up.
Okay, to put it in terms I can understand, just to rephrase it to make sure I've got it,
Yeah.
it's basically sending some commands, and it's not really registering much data until it sees the stars moves, and at that point it can go, okay, I've taken up the backlash, now it's really supposed to be moving.
You got it, exactly.
Okay. Now, does the analysis you just gave us, I heard the word declination a lot. Is that the question from Tom G was about RA calibration failing? Is it the same kind of thing that we have to worry about?
Well, there's generally not going to be, there's going to be little, if any, backlash in the RA direction because your RA drive is continuing to push that scope across the sky at sidereal rate. So your RA commands are basically just slowing down or speeding up that RA drive. So failure in the RA direction, that's a little less likely, and we'd have to look and see what happened in that case. You don't hear a lot about that. That could be a hot pixel problem. It could be, it could be a problem with the gear itself. We don't know.
Okay. Tom, feel free to ask the question again if we haven't gotten it answered. Okay?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on here. Okay, so now that you're calibrated, we're ready to start guiding. A couple things we need to think about are finding a good guide star, and then how long a guide exposure you want to use. Now, we've done a lot of work in PHD2. We've basically rewritten the star selection routine. These days, PHD2 is used a lot more in automation. For example, Sequence Generator Pro uses PHD2 pretty effectively, and that relies on having a good automatic star selection routine. So these days, I like to just let PHD2 pick the guide star. There's a keyboard shortcut, I think it's Control-S, and it's also on the menu. And PHD2 will generally find a good guide star. It won't pick two stars. If two stars are very close together, it will reject those. If a star is too bright and it's saturating, it will reject that. It's pretty good at rejecting hot pixels, so that's definitely a recommendation. The other thing now we want to talk a little about your guide exposure duration. That's something that's under your control, and you want to make sure that it's not too short, or you're going to be trying to guide out these random seeing fluctuations, and that's generally going to make your guiding worse if you're trying to do that. And if you make your guide exposures too long, you might bump up against falling behind the steepest sections of your RA periodic error. So I'm going to talk a little bit more on the next slides about chasing seeing. This is some data that Bruce collected taking some short half-second exposures on the same guide star and then some longer exposures. I've tried to make these on the same vertical axis of arc seconds. You can see that the variance is somewhere closer to half an arc second for these rapid exposures. Then when you go to longer exposures, you have much better, down around 0.2 of an arc second, less variability. I also did some measurements with my gear, and here's what I came up with. with very fast guide exposures down around 20th of a second, you see the stars just jumping around like crazy. As you increase your exposure to several seconds, the camera is averaging out those fluctuations, and they tend to converge to a much tighter centroid. So the message here basically is the longer your exposures are, the better you are in terms of getting rid of those random fluctuations, which are going to make guiding difficult. So there, you hear a lot of anecdotal evidence about don't chase seeing, and it's really true. The data is there. You want to have the longest guide exposures that you can, and still, but not too long that you can't keep up with the systematic changes like your declination drift or your RA error. And again, that guiding assistant is a good tool for coming up with that maximum exposure duration. Oh, there's one other thing you want to keep in mind is if you go too long, you could also saturate your guide stars, and that's not good either, because at saturation you're throwing away data, and PHD can't make an accurate centroid calculation. Let's see.
Before we go on to this next section here, we do have a question about guide speeds.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any preferences on guide speeds? Bill McLaughlin would like to know.
So I think generally sidereal rate or half, 1x or 0.5x are generally pretty good. I mean, obviously you don't want to go slower than sidereal, because then your RA motor's moving backwards. If your guides, I think you have to also think about the minimum pulse duration that your mount is able to handle. I know, for example, G11, Losmandy Gemini 2, there's a certain minimum guide pulse that'll be accepted, and if your guide rate is high, PHD is going to want to send these tiny pulses, and the mount just might ignore those. So, and that's a case where you want to have a lower guide rate so you can send longer pulses. There might be other considerations with other mounts, but I haven't seen a lot of cases where the default setting of what your mount ships with doesn't work. I know some of the EcuMod folks, that allows you to set a wide range of rates, and I've seen people set like a ridiculously low rate, and that doesn't really accomplish anything either, because then PHD has to send these very long guide pulses that can be longer than your exposure durations. So I think generally half to 1x is probably a good rule of thumb.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to go into guide algorithms here. Now, I notice this is getting towards the end, so I might go over these a little faster than I was planning, and then we can, Adam, I know you like to, at the end, sort of take questions for the last half hour. Is that right?
Yeah, but if you go over, you're fine, and we'll just take fewer questions or make them go quickly if there's stuff you definitely want to cover. Otherwise, however you want to run it. Yeah,
I'd kind of rather go over quickly what I have left, and then have more time for questions.
Right.
That way, you know, I'd
Andy,
rather.
There's another possibility. If you've got a whole lot of stuff to cover, you might want to see if Adam will schedule you again to come talk about some of the other things, rather than go through it less than it deserves. You might, just be a guest again next, a couple of months from now or a month from now, whatever. So don't shortchange it too much. We really A lot of people want to hear what these things.
Okay, good. So thanks. I will kind of go through these quickly, and then in the question section, if we need to come back to them, I will. So I was going to talk about now tuning of guiding parameters, and to talk about that, we sort of need to understand the individual guide algorithms that are present in PHD2. We allow separate guide algorithms on each axis, rate ascension declination. Almost all the time, the default algorithms are okay. So by guide algorithm, what I mean is going back to that picture I had at the beginning where we've determined how far away the star centroid is from your lock position. We have to determine what correction to send to the mount. PHD2 wants to avoid sending corrections that are just seeing fluctuation. So we always have some kind of low-pass filter on the data. And the strategies for coming up with a guide correction based on the raw offset from the lock position, that's what we call our guide algorithms. On the RA axis, the default is this hysteresis algorithm, and that's basically sort of a smoothed exponential average of the offsets over time. So on this graph in the corner, on the RA axis, if these points here represent your offset relative to that axis, PHD is maintaining sort of a smoothed average. That's what these smoother curves are representing. You can vary the hysteresis factor to have more or less smoothing effect or more filtering, and that smooth curve is going to give an effective star position as opposed to the actual offset, and PHD will use that new effective position to determine the guide pulse that's needed to move the star back. The aggressiveness parameter is a damping factor. It's often better to use less than 100% of a correction that works in conjunction with this hysteresis or smoothing factor. It sort of has an equivalent effect of damping those corrections, spreading them out over several cycles, to make sure that it's not sort of thrashing your mount. The other important factor is this minimum motion parameter, and basically what that is saying is anytime that PHD sees your offset of your guide star within that threshold, it's basically going to ignore it and not attempt to do any correction whatsoever. So that's our RA algorithm. On the declination axis, we have the default algorithm known as resist switch, and that's based on the idea that on deck we're trying to compensate for a slow and steady drift, generally due to a small polar alignment error, and we also are dealing with backlash, that it's going to take a lot to reverse the direction of the scope. You have to, so we want to apply slow, steady corrections in one direction, and resist switch will automatically detect which direction the corrections are going in and try not to reverse direction. Again, we have minimum motion threshold, which is very important. The guiding assistant will give you a recommendation for where to set that based on your seeing fluctuations. We have an aggressiveness or damping factor, and also this is a relatively new parameter, which will allow, it'll sort of override and do a fast switch if things are really getting out of control. I'm just going to gloss over this stuff now. there's another couple algorithms, low pass and low pass 2, which I think can be okay for RA, but they're also good for mounts that have higher end mounts with little or no backlash. This can be a good choice. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it's worth a try if you want to give it a try sometime. Let's see. Okay, so I have sort of a bunch of case studies here, things to look at while you're guiding. For example, so I think it's really important. My favorite tool to look at while I'm guiding is this graph. I especially like turning on corrections, so you can see not only your guide star offset, but also the corrections that PHD2 is sending to bring that star back. So blue is RA and red is declination. This is an example of overcorrection. So we see that we're sending corrections in opposite directions almost every cycle, up then down, up then down. So this would be something that you want to avoid. And you know, just by being able to see these on the graph, you'll know if you're seeing this zigzag pattern of corrections. You know you're overcorrecting and you're chasing the seeing. So the way you would avoid that would be to reduce your aggressiveness, or even better, increase your your RA min motion, so you're not chasing it. The opposite would be undercorrecting. Here's a case where the corrections are not keeping up with the deck drift, so the declination is staying above the 0. So it's not aggressive enough, it's not keeping up. And again, being able to see these corrections makes it pretty obvious what's happening. Let's see. I still have a lot to go. Maybe we should stop at this point.
If you want to stop, that's fine. There are a bunch of questions all coming in at one time.
Yeah.
Kind of assorted ones. We'll hit you up to have you back. So don't feel too bad, and we won't feel bad when we hit you up for that. Do you want to stop now, and I could start reading out the questions to you?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Okay, I'm going to start at the bottom, which might not be the order they came in, but first let me do that. From Bill, resist switch implies an analysis of the guiding over time. How much time?
Yeah. So, Bill, it's basically, I think it's a fixed number of exposures. It's the order of 10 or 11 exposures, and it's not time as in wall time. It's number of guide exposures, which is a little quirky. That's something we should probably look at in the future.
Tolga is asking, when you make these changes on the fly, do they take effect right away?
Absolutely, yep, immediately, yep.
And I believe Tom G found 2.50. Did you say that just came out yesterday?
Yes, but it's only a very small. So we've had these incremental releases that have been coming up every week or 2 weeks, and those we've been doing those frequently. But the latest major release, 2.4.1, was several months ago. So it's new relative to 2.4.1, but it's not new at all if you've been following the development releases.
Yizhu is asking several guider cameras, mostly the QHY52, and he also sees it on his attic GP, and also possibly Lodestar. He says Lodestar. I've heard it from Lodestar too. Timeout problem. It'll be fine for a few minutes, but then suddenly time out and disconnect.
Yeah.
Familiar with it?
Yeah, those are generally either driver problems or problems with the communication between your PC and the camera. We see that when there are USB extenders in use. All kinds of different factors can cause that. And they're generally something you have to look at on a case-by-case basis and sort of go through the diagnostic process. Start by connecting the camera directly to your PC with a USB cable. If you have any hubs in there, remove them. Try switching to different ports. We do see those a lot, but they're generally issues with how the camera is connected. So there's no general, I can't give any general answer for the solution. I know, and then things come up with drivers too. For example, I think somebody the other day was saying there was an update to a Starlight Express driver which seemed to be causing more communication errors, and they rolled back to an older version and it works great. It's also, you can run into a pitfall. It might not be cause and effect. It might be, you might change the driver, but it might not even be related to the driver. It's hard to say. So we do try in PHD2 to have lots of information in the debug log, so we can pinpoint if there is a communication problem with the camera or somewhere else in PHD2. We'll be able to identify that pretty quickly if we have a chance to look at the debug log.
Another question. Oh, it just disappeared on me. I'm sorry. Getting back to guiding rates, my understanding is, this is from Marcin, please correct me if I'm wrong, that at least while using EQ mod, RA tracking rate set to 1 will cause a motor either to run twice as fast as its normal rate or to stop.
Yep, that's exactly correct. So that would be for 1x, and half x would either run at half sidereal or 1.5 sidereal. He's got it right.
Yep. It's always engaged.
Yep.
Drift alignment tool, when an error gets smaller, a purple circle that actually helps a lot gets very tiny, and I have a hard time seeing my star and seeing how far to move it. Maybe it's just me, but each time I do it, I wish there was some kind of zoom.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting request, but that's also a good problem to have, because if you're that close, that you're so close to polar align, any improvement you do after that point is, you're already perfect. So it's icing. I don't know. You're gilding the lily. That's what I'm trying to say. If you get that close, you're done. But zoom is an interesting idea. I like that. And there's been other cases. Sometimes there's other times where zoom would be nice too. So I like that.
Tom has another question. Is the excessive backlash a problem with my mount? If so, is it fixable? He has a CGEN. That's he was asking earlier about the error, the RA star didn't move enough. And I think, Tom, we kind of have to debug your case specifically. I'd first make sure that ASCOM itself is moving the mount.
Yeah.
You have to go one at a time and just make sure, see what's working. If ASCOM itself isn't moving the mount, then you have something involved there. But if ASCOM is, then you go into that further. I don't know, Andy, if you have anything to add to that.
No, you're right. I agree. The manual guide tool is the best thing to diagnose that, because that so you'd get your guide star, your camera looping exposures, and then press north, and you should see that star move, or west or east or whatever. And if it's not, then it's a problem with your mount or the communications or your ASCOM driver or whatever. I know it can be very frustrating, and it's hard to find sometimes, but like Adam says, you have to isolate the problem and do that by eliminating factors one at a time until you find it.
I feel like we've all done that with everything in this hobby, so
Absolutely.
it's what makes your brain work in your old age.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. I do think, yeah, Yizu's mentioning that the same hardware works fine with other programs. This is on the guide cameras. So he's not sure if it's a USB cable issue.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things I think I've heard a few people having the issue. I don't know if everybody's having the issue, though. So that's the odd thing.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that I've talked to Craig Stark several times, and it's almost a joke with him. He's got this standard saying, always swap USB cables first. Before you start complaining about anything, always swap your USB cable, and then if it's still hanging on, then we'll talk.
Yeah, that's true.
I've gone through about 5 in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
The hobby takes the hobby isn't nice to USB cables, especially if you have freezing weather and all of that.
Yeah.
Adam, are you also going over to chat to get some of the questions out of there? There's two screens for people to put in questions here. One of them we've been going through is Q&A, and the other one is over in group chat. There are a couple of comments over in group chat.
Yeah, Sean's mentioning to Tom's comment, loose clutch possibly. He had that with an RA calibration fail. So that's something to look into for Tom. So it could be a lot of issues. You really have to go one at a time.
Yeah.
And then Frank is asking ASCOM Pulse Guide versus ST4. Is ASCOM better?
Well, it's better in the sense that with an ASCOM connection, PHD2 knows where your scope is pointing and will use that information to give you compensate your guiding for where you're pointing in the sky. It'll automatically flip your calibration when you do a meridian flip. All kinds of good stuff. So it's much better in that sense. In terms of the performance, that depends on your mount. I know most modern mounts, pulse guiding is going to be just as good, if not better, than ST4, but there are mounts out there where ST4 is better. So that was that thing I was talking about where when you connect your gear, if you find that you do need to use ST4, then go ahead and use it, but also set up an ASCOM connection as your auxiliary mount so PHD knows where the scope is pointing. Also, if you use ASCOM, that allows you to eliminate one more cable. That's one less thing that can go wrong.
Yeah, one of the benefits that I like of connecting ASCOM is you, with the drift alignment tool, it's one click to slew to the south and then to the east or west horizon.
Yep.
There are a lot of shortcuts that it just introduces that you didn't realize it could do automatically.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's actually what's happened with PHD2 over the first PhD. It seems like they've made everything easy. I have to give Andy and all the developers credit. The PHD2 is amazing. First by just giving your measurements in arc seconds, then the drift alignment tool, they've really stepped up their game and really given us a lot of what we're asking for. So, Andy, do you have let me ask you this. Someone who's not a developer, how do they contribute to PHD2? Do you guys take donations, or what do you advise?
Okay, that's good. Actually, let me jump ahead. I did have a slide on that. Let me see. So, um, first of all, we want to hear about any problems that you have. If we don't know about it, we're not psychic. We can't fix it unless we hear about it. And chances are, if you're having that problem, there's other people having that problem. It's something that could bite any one of us. So by taking the time to collect your log files and find a way to reproduce the problem and tell us about it, we're going to make every effort to fix it, and it's going to help everybody in the community. So I really encourage you, if you do see a problem, please help us work through it, and that's how the program gets better over time. We also love to hear your ideas for new features and improvements. We've had tons of amazing suggestions. A lot of the new things that you see in PHD2 have come from users saying, can you do this or do that, like this Zoom idea that we just heard right now. If you want to get hands-on and contribute, we have things that we need help with. The manual can always use updating, clarifying if you find something missing or confusing. You can mention it, or even better, rewrite that page and help us out that way. Translating is something we could use. If you're a developer, we absolutely want your help. We have a huge backlog of bugs that need to be fixed and features that need to be implemented, so we'd love to have you along. If you're finding that your equipment is not integrated well in PHD or working well, chances are the reason for that is because none of the developers has that particular camera or other gadget. And an example of this is SBIG AO units are not supported right now, but somebody was kind enough to loan us an SBIG AO, so sometime when we have a chance, that'll get integrated into PHD2. So those are the ways that we'd love to have your help. That's it. Oh yeah, if there's any web developers out there, our website is horrible, so if you want to help us redesign it, we could use help there too.
I'll agree with that. Your website's horrible. That's the only critique you'll get from me. Bill's commenting, first of all, he's found very little difference between ASCOM, ST4, and Paramount Direct Guide. That's just his personal opinion. I think he was responding to someone that was asking earlier. But for remote guide heads, I think this is a comment maybe for Tolga, because I know Tolga was asking about this earlier. Remote guide heads on SBIG use the SGP SBIG Guider API from the SGP page.
Yeah.
We had a side conversation with Tolga earlier about that. So, and is that the same with the the CCDs that have the guide camera built in? Do you know the answer to that?
Okay, so those are a little bit of a different situation. The problem with those are that there can really be one application that can control that camera, including both chips. So that's why something like Maxim that controls everything is able to guide with them no problem. But in PHD2 we have a little bit of a problem because your imaging application is the one that really is controlling the camera. The nice thing we do have going is SGP has this API guider thing. If you're an SGP user with one of those cameras, then SGP sort of exposes that guide chip as an ASCOM camera that PHD can use.
Andy?
Yep.
Marcin is asking if you could give us some guidelines regarding balancing. How important is it? Do you balance one axis heavier than another, or do Do you balance? Do you off balance both of them? How unbalanced should it be? He's got a whole lot of questions here. What
Yeah.
effect does it really have on guiding from a software perspective? Does it matter at all?
So it depends on your mount, right? So I can talk about my Losmandy G11. I've got a bunch of backlash in my RA drive, and I get very good results if I keep a slight westward bias so that the worm is always riding on the same side as the worm wheel. So that's an example of where a slight imbalance makes a huge difference. I know a lot of other Losmandy owners have experienced that same thing, even to go so far as rigging up those hanging counterweight systems, if you've ever seen them. I know other mounts, higher end mounts, tend to be less sensitive to balance. Also, balance can help on your declination backlash problem, but that's a little more tricky because the balance is changing as you're moving across the sky. Hopefully that's a start to an answer, but you know, if you have more, ask it in the forum and we can talk about it more.
And Marcin has another question. Going back to starting and stopping the RA motor,
Yeah.
Remember you answered about that?
Yeah.
Some people say that it has an effect on tracking, and that's why they set RA to a number different than 1.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you, and do you have any comments on that?
That makes sense to me. The default for, again, my G11 is 0.5 or half sidereal, and that's always worked well for me. So that's really speeding up or slowing down the motor, never stopping it. Bruce uses an AP900, and the default there is 1x sidereal rate, and he gets great results with that. So it probably depends on the mount.
Okay, thank you. Now, Andy, what we have to do kind of is go through these questions and stuff like that. They keep coming in, and they don't come in any order. They kind of bounce around. So
That's fine.
there's 2 of us looking through these things, seeing if we've got them all. Has everybody turned in all the questions they're going to have? Let's see.
Just got one. Oh, and it disappeared on me. Hold on. I don't know why that happens. Tolga was asking. Oh, it completely disappeared on me. Hold on.
Is there somebody, here's one for you while you're looking. Is there somebody, oh, now it's gone away. Is there somebody who I can ask to, who I can communicate one-on-one with to get this up and running? I apparently have some issues. I'm talking about issues with PhD guiding. Tom, this is a joke. He may have other issues too. We don't know. But, what's the best way to get somebody to, you know, visit with you and sit down with you while you're setting up PhD guiding?
I think the good thing is there's so many PhD users out there. If there's like a local astronomy club or something like that, there's a very good chance there's somebody close by who's used PhD. And pretty much all the diagnostic techniques that you learned with PhD1 are just as applicable with PhD2. There's literally, you know, thousands and thousands of people out there. So one-on-one is your astronomy club's probably the local astronomy club's a good bet.
Tom, you're not in the room, so you can't just quick respond, but you just got to get in with somebody in your club just to announce on cloudy nights that you live in such and so place. Anybody want to get together some night over at your house and set up a PhD guiding run? And remember, this isn't something you need to do at a dark sky site. Yeah. You can do it in your backyard with the full moon, and you should get everything set up and ready to run, you know, when you're not wasting dark sky. If you can do that. That's just my little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're not on cloudy nights, I would sign up there and you would just post your questions. They'll give you a list of 5 things to try while you're trying to get this one-on-one session together, and it might be one of those 5 things that fixes it. there's like 2 or 3 things that stand out in my head that you heard earlier, and if none of those work, then it gets a little bit more complex. So whichever way you want to do it, depending on what you're comfortable with. I lost Tolga's question completely, but it had to do with guiding throughout the sky being kind of inconsistent with his CGEM, and I don't know if that's indicative of something or whether that's just the way it is. Andy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, it's hard to say, not knowing what exactly his problem was. I mean, all kinds of things are changing, right? Your balance is changing. You're looking through more atmosphere near the horizon, so you're going to have worse seeing. You know, near the zenith, you might have balance issues that are going to make things more tricky. It's hard to say. We really have to look at your guide logs and see how that looks. Oh, but I should mention, looking at guide logs, we do have a tool. Let me give one of these screens here. There's a link to it on the OpenPHD guiding webpage called PHD2 Log Viewer, and that'll allow you to open up your PHD log file and look at sort of the same information that you had on the graph, but you can look at that after the fact and try to get some idea of what was happening in that guide session. Again, that's available on our webpage.
There's a question coming in from Jose about the drift align function.
Mm-hmm.
How good is it? I know that with me, I am a little perplexed by it because it says I've got half an arc second or something like that, and then for some reason, without anybody changing anything, it goes up to 4 arc seconds. So we're like, who moved the mount? It's not a permanent peer. Anyway, how good is it? What kind of feedback do you get on it, Andy?
So I haven't heard a lot of specific feedback like that about. I know from my experience using it in the field, it's always been what you're looking for in guiding is good enough, right? You're not trying to be perfect. You want your guiding to be good enough that you can focus on your imaging, which is what you really care about. So you don't have to be perfectly polar aligned to get really good guiding. And I've always found that the alignment tool gets me. What's important to me is to get it done quickly, so I'm not spending all night polar aligning if I'm setting up in a dark site and I've got a limited amount of time that I'm going to be there. You can get it done in 10 or 15 minutes if you've practiced it a few times. And I can say one thing about the level of uncertainty that you might be able to improve your estimate. It is basing it on the number of data points that are on the graph. So as time goes by, there's going to be data shifting off the left and new points coming in on the right. So just the random statistical fluctuations can change the slope of that trend line. So that can cause you to see slightly different numbers. But if you're down in that level where you're seeing a nice flat trend with no motion up and down over the several minutes, then you're more than good enough to do imaging just about anywhere at any scale. So if people see specific problems, then yeah, we want to hear about it, and we can investigate what's going on. But generally the feedback I've got has been very positive.
Thank you. I don't think there are any new questions coming in on Q&A. I think we've got them all.
I did have one question. This is Frank. I just loaded your viewer for the log, and it said Jordan said it wasn't safe. Uninstalled. Just a comment.
Oh, well, yeah. We can. I can try to get an exception or something like that. That always happens with just about anything that hasn't been downloaded millions of times. But you know what you can do if you're ever in any doubt? They have these online scanners. There's one that I like to use called Jotti, Jotti, and you give them the link to the file or upload the file, and they'll scan it with like 10 or 12 different virus scanners, and that'll tell you for real whether there's a real virus there or not, or if it's a false positive from Norton. And I pretty much guarantee it's a false positive from Norton. But if you're in doubt and you're paranoid, run it through an online virus scanner.
No, I'm pretty sure it's safe. I just was going to let you know. I'm trying to figure out how I can run it now because it kind of deleted it on here.
No, thanks for letting me know.
Hey Andy, this is Sean. First of all, I want to say thanks for doing this session. It's been awesome and really informative. I did have like one question I just wanted to throw. Maybe it's a little, it's an outlier question sort of. So I was out last night and it was really windy and the seeing was terrible. And I mean like 5 arc seconds in RA and 7 in declination. I did big spikes, and I was trying to tweak PHD. Maybe I didn't want to give up, basically, put it that way, right? So I was like, well, what can I do maybe to help a little bit, right? So I don't know. I upped my exposure time a little bit. I upped my minimum motion to like 45 on both axes. So like, what would you do in that situation if you didn't want to give up? You know what I mean? Like, is there anything else you could do, or is that about it?
Yeah, I've been there. I live in New England, so we have horrible seeing, and that happens a lot. I think you're on the right track. Those are the things that I would have done too, is upping the minimum motion and exposure time. Maybe not. You can try that guiding assistant and see what numbers it gives you for min motion. That's one thing. You know, turn down the aggressiveness. If you know you've got a good polar alignment and your periodic errors under control, you can really either turn up the hysteresis or turn down the min aggression. But yeah, those things you were saying, you're on the right track. Was it able to do okay when you increased those things?
Yeah, it's a really ugly graph, but I got some usable, but you know the stars aren't perfectly round, but hey, you know.
And then wider field, of course, if that's
right. Yeah, like a 750 millimeter, and then f5. So
yeah.
You need an observatory with really high walls.
Well, I was in another state, so I needed a fence or something.
Yeah. So it does look like we've got through all of the questions in the Q&A side. I don't see any new ones in chat. You guys pretty much have your opportunity now to ask your questions. I'll just reiterate, we all probably use PHD2, or I think probably 90% of us must be using PHD or PHD2. And I think the polar alignment, or the drift alignment tool is awesome. I really like that tool. Alex's comment, I usually, for my last just kind of confirming step in the drift alignment tool, I just let it run for like 2 minutes or 3 minutes instead of 45 seconds.
Yeah.
And you see where the graph's going. You just want to make sure that it's really close to the end of the graph by after three or so minutes, and then you're good.
Yeah. Yep. Right. And if you're in doubt, go through one of those polar alignment calculator things, and you might be surprised. You really don't need to be that close. You know, within depending on where you're imaging in the sky, and an arc minute or so, you're gonna be fine.
Yep.
The field rotation calculator is what I meant to say.
Yep. Yeah, so I don't see any questions. Andy, thank you very much for doing this. It was a great presentation. It's a great program.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Yeah.
And
So
thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
I'm helping to organize a workshop with Craig Stark that's going to be May 24th up at our TMC. So anybody who's on this end of the continent who wants to come to our TMC up in Big Bear, you go to the RTMC website and register, and Craig will be there all day. Obviously, if you have any questions about PhD and how to guide, he does know a lot about it. So you might want to take advantage of that. That's all.
And a reminder: next week is NEAF, and I'm going to be uploading some live stuff from NEAF, and then next week's session will be just a recap of what I saw. I'll dispel any rumors or hopefully reveal new products. And after that, lots of good stuff coming. We have the guys from Sequence Generator Pro coming on. We're going to do a session on 10-micron mounts. Messier Marathon in one day, or I should say in one night. We have someone coming in to speak on optics and manual integration in PI. So we have lots of good stuff coming up. So remember, keep your eyes open, and we'll be doing this every Sunday. Again, thank you, Andy. I don't see any. Oh, I see. Nope, we already got to that question. They still move around even if it's not a new question. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.